All right, guys, I think we are live. So, welcome back. If you joined us before, or in some cases, welcome in if this is your first time. This is our 31 Days of Prevention series where we come together to share information, inspiration, and motivation to increase awareness and prevent future and ongoing domestic violence. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Marcy Batiste. I am the executive director here at 9 Seconds. And today I'm excited. I'm joined by my associate executive director. I can't talk today, Cassie McGee. So it's going to be a pleasure. It's going to be a real casual flow for this. We're going to kind of just talk about healing today because every 9 seconds in this country, a woman is either abused or assaulted. And it's not okay, but the solutions are also not that simple. There's a level of complexities that go into it, and the nuances are as different as the individuals who are involved in it. And so it's important, I think, because Cassie and I share one thing as sister survivors, that we've both had experience with domestic violence, but we have very different realities as it relates to that. And so, honoring everyone's different human experience, but kind of giving you an opportunity to take a look at what prevention looks like and the different ways that we can go about preventing it. Here at 9 Seconds, we are a progressive nonprofit. Our mission is heart centered, and our approach is non traditional, which is why we're having the conversation that we're about to have today, which is about healing from the source. And when we think about the source, we're talking about going all the way back. A lot of times, the work with domestic violence surrounds putting out immediate flames. And we like to say that we're after the fire itself. And so that's kind of what drives each one of us. And what the board is really truly focused on is making sure that we take this non-traditional, semi-aggressive approach to something that is, like I said, it's not simple, it's complex, and it involves people in different ways and all kinds of stuff. And so that's what our message today is going to be about. That's what our discussion is going to be about. Cassie, I just want to give you an opportunity to kind of introduce yourself a little bit more, and then we'll kind of dive into the topic and we'll talk about generational systems and where the healing actually starts.
So again, I'm Cassie McGee, and I am the Associate Executive Director of 9 Seconds. It's definitely a cause that I'm very excited to get behind. Like Marcy had mentioned, we're sister survivors, and so we've both had our experience with domestic violence. And I think part of this conversation came about because what we like to do and like what we kind of say between each other is we don't try to attack the flames, we want to attack the fire itself, the source of it. And so that's how this topic kind of came about. Is there's so much more healing that needs to be done than after a relationship or after abuse. There's usually a source of it that you can really, if you try, you can backtrack it and kind of see maybe what started to change within you that led you into a situation or a cycle or a pattern. So I'm really excited to do this video today and kind of share our experiences of what we realized about ourselves. And each person's self-realization journey is their own, but hopefully this can start someone's for them.
Right. So to that point, one of the things that we talk about here at 9 Seconds, we talk about a challenge to change. And obviously, anytime you're going to address any outstanding issues, it's going to require a change. And one of the hardest things sometimes is that acknowledging the fact that that change has to start here. Particularly when it comes to domestic violence, it's easy to kind of point the finger outward and to look at the outlying people involved or situations or circumstances that are involved. But one thing that we understand is that domestic violence is a symptom. It's a symptom of a generational system. And so when we talk about going after the fire, we're after that generational system. We're after reconstructing and trying to reconstruct what happened so that what you were born into doesn't come out of you. So to kind of give you guys a little bit of framework for what that looks like, a generational system is the pre-existing foundational beliefs and behavioral system that you're born into. It's then passed down from one generation to the next. And with each passing, it mutates just a little bit based on your environmental exposures. So the system that I'm born into, um, unbeknownst to most of us, until you start really doing this work and taking these dives, is that those things are affecting how we make decisions for the rest of our lives. And so your generational system looks at birth up through adolescence, but there's a critical period in there between birth and age 7, where a lot of times when you think about kids being in a room with you, we think that they're just playing with their toys, or they're watching TV, or they're on their tablets or whatever. And we think that they're not listening, that they're not absorbing, that they're not garnering and gathering information. Like from 0 to age 7, you're a sponge. You're constantly consuming data, figuring out, how am I going to apply that? How am I going to process it? What's it mean? I mean, you think about the period from birth. Intuitively, you know to cry when you're born, and instinctively people respond with attention, love, affection. So you now can equate crying with attention. That's one of your first foundational lessons. That's one of your intuition starts with you. And so you're constantly pulling in this data, and then you're figuring out, how do I apply this? And then you learn to adapt your behavior to what the data tells you. And so we talk about it more in the book Challenge to Change, but that's just kind of giving you guys an overall look. So when we talk about healing the source, and we're talking about my experience with domestic violence, or Cassie's experience with domestic violence, what we're saying is there was a problem before that ever happened. That abusive relationship, or the choice to enter into relation with an abuser, is based off of things that happened to us, and things that we witnessed, and things that we were exposed to long before we ever even met that individual. And that's why domestic violence is merely a system, or it's a symptom of the system that you were born into, that generational system. So with that background kind of out of, I know it was kind of a long-winded description, but I want to make sure we all operate from the same starting point as we begin to have this conversation. And certainly understanding the generational system and how it impacts your life is critical to that. We both said we're sister survivors. So we've been through some stuff, we've seen some stuff, but our ages are 20, 30 years apart. We're both from Iowa, but we didn't know each other growing up. My parents didn't know her parents. We didn't know one another until adulthood, right? But yet and still, we both ended up in this place and somehow became sister survivors because of things that happened to us, and not understanding that prevention begins with healing before there's a problem. And that's when we're talking about getting to the fire, getting to that solution, digging up the root. We can't just focus on the fruit all the time. Yes, it's important to acknowledge the fruit, but we got to get to, where did it come from? How did it get here? And how do we fix it? That's kind of the basis. So Cass, I'm going to throw it over to you. Kind of tell a little bit about your thoughts as far as maybe some of the things that happened in your background that maybe you didn't realize you needed to heal from, or you didn't realize kind of what the impact was going to be on you.
Yeah. So for me, my self-healing, or I guess the awareness of self-healing, didn't really hit me until well after I had a divorce. And to me, people always say, before you get to the next relationship, you're always supposed to focus on healing. Make sure you're healed before you go into a new relationship, or before you get into a different kind of commitment. But no one ever really explains what exactly that healing is. And so for me, I thought, if I could talk about my ex, if I could be around my ex, if I could think about my ex and not, break down into depression or tears, or have this anger or frustration, if I could stay neutral emotionally, and interact with him on a neutral basis where it's not emotionally fired, I must be healed, right? And that's kind of the premise of how I started to realize there might be more than that. So after that relationship, I had entered into a commitment with someone, and that relationship definitely taught me that I had low self-worth. I had low self-value. And I realized I felt that way after my divorce, but this new relationship, he was amazing. He treated me very well. He treated me respectfully, never called me out of my name. He would, open doors for me. He was great, but it felt wrong to accept that. And that really confused me because it's like, well, I enjoy it, I like it, but it almost felt wrong to accept that kind of behavior. Like, okay, so you opened a door for me, so now I need to do something for you. I have to make sure I'm giving every time that I receive something. And it was through him treating me so well that I really realized that I have broken pieces much further than below the surface that maybe I need to address and fix. And so that relationship, I did end it because I wasn't ready. And I didn't know that I wasn't ready when I entered into it. And from there, that's when I kind of started to think about what are some of the things that I don't notice about myself, that I began to notice in that relationship. And so I was definitely very insecure. I definitely had a hard time asking anyone for help when it came to anything, to the point where, I passed out going to pick my girls up from daycare because I overworked myself to a point that I had gotten an infection. And I didn't even know because I was just constantly moving and doing, and I never asked for help. So I definitely realized that was a key indicator. And I noticed that, again, back to the self-worth, self-value. What did I do for self-care, for self-love? I really didn't. I was always in service to others, which I think a lot of women fall under. And it almost feels wrong when you're not. So it was little things like that that really started the journey for me of realizing that there's much more to heal. Now, I don't know what your experience was about things that maybe you first noticed where you're like, okay, I have to dig a little deeper. Were they similar? Were they different?
So for me, it's interesting because I grew up in an abusive household. I've shared my story hundreds, if not thousands of times. And so I was born into a system where I didn't realize until much later, my mother had low self-esteem. She had, to your point, low self-worth. She made some choices and some decisions for her life that then impacted me. So because of the things that I was exposed to. So I saw what an abusive relationship looked like. I didn't see what healthy, safe love looked like. I saw what I perceived to be weakness from her. And I internalized as I processed that data in that adolescent stage. I was 13. I ran away from home and I said, I don't want that for my life. Like, I'm not going to be that. So if that's what you want for your life, good for you. I'm going to choose a different path. That's not ever going to happen to me. Fast forward, lo and behold, boom, there I am. It happens to me. And that's because I didn't realize that any of that stuff needed to heal. I thought because I was financially secure, which was what I had in my adolescent brain determined was the cause of her being in an abusive relationship. If I deal with that piece of it, then I can prevent any of that stuff from happening. I had no clue that there was a foundation of beliefs about myself, about the fact that I was not lovable. I've got daddyless daughter issues and all kinds of stuff that I've, like I said, talk about all the time. But I always viewed it like oh, I've moved on, I've moved forward, I've progressed, I'm successful, I'm financially stable, I make good money, I take care of myself, I'm good. When I got divorced, I'm good. I can financially take care of myself. Um, I was so focused on the finance that I lost and never looked at me. I never looked at what I need, what I think, what I feel, what I believe. I never looked at how these things came about until I was physically assaulted, held hostage, and nearly killed. At that point, I remember the moment looking in the mirror and saying, how did I become this girl? How did I get here? How did I become that? Um, and it was that kind of sparked that journey to say, you got the finance. So clearly that wasn't the thing. That wasn't enough to prevent this from happening. So when I look at preventing this from happening again, because what I witnessed was that through a series of relationships that were all toxic or abusive in one way or another, my progression was getting worse. I was making worse choices than the ones that I started with. And I knew instinctively, if I don't fix this now and I don't start figuring out what the thing is, because it's not finances, if I don't start figuring that out, then next time I might end up dead. And so that for me was that moment where something clicked and said, healing looks this moving on is not healing. Covering up's not healing. Stuffing it down is not healing. Pretending that it doesn't happen isn't healing. Like, all that stuff still goes with you. The baggage still comes with you. And so that for me was that moment where that kind of clicked and was just like, so talk about kind of what was your healing experience like, as you, because we were different stages when we realized, in different situations where we realized that we had to kind of roll it back. What did that look like? What did that process to get you started look like?
Yeah, so I think the first piece of the puzzle was really identifying that I had not healed. And then the next hardest one is figuring out, okay, if I haven't healed, I feel good, I feel fine. What needs healing, you know? So then you have to really, and that's when you end up going back to your childhood. And this is part of the reason why me personally, I'm super fascinated with psychology. And so that's kind of what I went to school for. And that's when that kind of helped spurred my healing process, because when I didn't know where to start, it was like, well, let me go back to my childhood. Let me see, let me think back on my memories. What are some things that maybe I repressed or I don't think about or I never actually got forgiven myself for? Um, and I think that was the major thing there, was forgiving myself for things that happened in my childhood, because when you're a child and things occur, you don't know, you don't understand what's happening. You take that in internally and you end up blaming yourself. So then you act it out later on. So for me, my whole life, my mom has always been very, very, very vocal about sex. She always kept me, my sister, and brother well informed about anything involving sex. And that was her way to protect us as kids, because for her, the more you know, the more informed you are, the less at risk you're going to be. Which I love that she did that with us, because it definitely helped me later in life to identify, like, this could go the wrong way, or he might only want to get into my pants and that's why he's saying this, those things that all of us got taught at some point. I think what occurred though is, because she introduced the idea of sex so early to me, um, my mind couldn't fully wrap around it. And so I think I created a narrative that might not have been true about sex. And part of the generational thing that has happened within my family is, my mom's mother, she was sexually abused. My mother was sexually abused, and then I got sexually abused. So it's almost like this chain reaction. And that was my mom's way of trying to stop that reaction. Um, but it almost confused me even more when it did happen, because now it's like, this is a thing that you should not do. Now it's happening. And what does that mean? What does that look like? So that's one of those things that I never quite talked about, and I never dealt with it. It just kind of was like, oh, it happened, and that's it. And then, sorry. And then my mom, she herself, she put up her own guards, which that's her story, but she had put up her own guards, as a result of her being sexually abused, and it made her very tough on the exterior. So we didn't really grow up with that love and hugging and, I love yous and kissing and tenderness, from a mother. We got that tough love. You need to learn to be independent, stick up for yourself, and that's the only way you're going to survive. And that's the only way my mom knew how to protect us, was to show us that. And it helped us significantly. But at the same time, we never got to see her in a loving relationship with a family member or with a man, So for us, it was really difficult. And I say us because I've had these conversations with my brother and sister. And I know it was really hard for me to identify what a healthy relationship actually looked like.
Right.
And it became a combination of all these different things I thought back to on my childhood, where I felt confused, or I didn't feel loved, or I didn't know how to identify what is love. And, we grew up in the ghetto. And so there was always fighting and violence around us. And there was also a lot of sexual abuse for other family members. And it's like that almost became a thing that just happened. It wasn't a question. It kind of was like, yeah, well, we lived there, and that just happens when you live there. And so it wasn't until I became an adult and I realized I have my own red flags of how I'm interacting with people, whether it's romantic or not. And I began to question that and see those red flags. And then I started to link those red flags back to things in my childhood. But now, because I'm an adult, I understand them in a much different way. I understand what it was and that it wasn't okay. Some of the confusion went away because now I see things very clearly because I'm an adult instead of a child looking at these surroundings and these situations. So I think that is really what helped me heal, is connecting some of my current present actions and dysfunctions that I had within myself to things that happened in my childhood and looking at it from an adult perspective. And when I was able to do that, I had to learn how to forgive myself for going through those situations, as well as the people that were involved in those situations. Whether it be my mom's ex who abused her, and I watched that, so I had to forgive him because he grew up in a dysfunctional generational system. And so it's not to take away the blame or to minimize what occurred, but you have to forgive others as well as yourself in order to truly heal from that experience and start to reshape that experience to make you stronger, not weaker. So that's really what I did for my healing process, and it helped. And I'm still going through it. I'm still learning to heal. And the craziest thing, it's easier to forgive them than it is yourself, even when it wasn't you who did anything wrong as a child. Even leading up as an adult, there's things I have to forgive myself daily for being in an abusive relationship and having kids within an abusive relationship. But you own up to your part in it. As an adult, you have to know what you did, own it, and then forgive yourself. And that's how you don't keep repeating it, and that's how you heal from it. So that's kind of my experience and how I chose to tackle my healing journey.
No, like you brought up some really good points. I was making some notes about some of the similarities. And it's like there's so much, I don't even know where to start unpacking it, because one of the things, I think I'm going to start here because I think this leans into sort of the other things that I made notes about. And the thing that I wrote down was normalizing chaos. If you're subjected to it enough, the unthinkable becomes fathomable. Like you don't think anything of it. Like you said, like it's what just happened. Like it's normal. And that chaos and normalizing that chaos again goes all the way back when we talk about intuition and adaptability. You start adapting to what you're exposed to. You adapt to the environmental exposures that you have. And you know, the our human ability to adapt is an amazing thing, but not if it's left unchecked. You know, and so we start adapting to things that we should not adapt to, things that there's absolutely no way. Um, and so that normalizing that chaos is one of those things when we're looking at prevention. Like, as long as we're normalizing chaos, because what happens is, um, even though chaos may be bad and the what's happening in that environment is bad or it doesn't feel good, it's what we know. And so sometimes we're less scared about what we know because, oh, well, I already know I can survive that, or I already know how this is going to end up. And so we don't push back. We don't fight that, when really that's where the healing the source starts, is identifying those chaoses that we're normalizing, that we're accepting, and we're tolerating them, and we shouldn't be. But who has those conversations with us, right? Nobody has those conversations. um and then a big thing, like, I think yes, you saw me clap when you were talking about forgiveness, because whew, boy,
Yeah.
forgiveness is so hard, um for so many of us and for a variety of different reasons. But the thing I'll say about forgiveness and forgiving yourself, when so part of my healing journey and trying to identify my source, I sought therapy and was seeing a psychologist at the time, or psychiatrist, I don't know, whatever she was. Ended up, I was like, girl, I'm done with you because you don't get me. But this is why, because I am that person who, once I understand what the opponent or who the opponent really is, I can forgive, because I'm trying to heal. I'm trying to not just stuff it down. I'm not trying to pretend that it didn't happen. And I'm not trying to sit in this place or stew in anger or resentment. So she said to me, I kid you not, she said to me, we were talking about my abuse, and she said, well, do you think that you deserved what happened to you? I'm like, no, absolutely not. And she said, well, you don't seem like you're angry. I'm like, this happened several months ago. Like, at that point, like, I don't know, 4 or 6 months prior.
Mm-hmm.
I can't afford to stay angry that long. Like, while I'm sitting here with unforgiveness in my spirit and on my heart, bro's out there living life. He's out
Mm-hmm.
there doing him, living his best life, drinking, partying, banging broads, the whole nine. And I'm sitting here on your couch supposed to be mad. And I just told her, I said, you know what? I think we have a difference in how we view what the healing process looks like. And if you feel that all these months later that I should still be sitting firmly inside of anger, there's nothing. This is our last session. And it was our last session, because I'm like, you don't, I can't do that. Like, I have to forgive. And to your point, forgiving ourselves, and understanding, like, you know, I tell clients all the time, you did the best you could with the information that you had in the moment. And yes, looking back a year later, 5 years later, 20 years later, you have had now a whole new set of human experiences. You got a whole bunch more data to be able to now go back and process that information. So you can't hold on to the fact that you made X, Y, or Z decision, or this or that happened to you, um, and own other people's choices. They made the choices they made. They impacted you, but how you responded, There's not a right or wrong. If you're here able to talk about it, you survived, then you did okay.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, surviving is the goal, and then truly getting to that healing spot. And then the last thing I want to talk about that you brought up was the beliefs in sex. And so it's interesting. I hadn't even thought about it until you said it, right? So you said that your mom talked to you about it very early on, was very open about it, and that had one impact on you, to where you're like, okay, but like you weren't prepared for the information at the time that she gave it to you, was what I heard. Then there's my mom, who you'd think I was born of immaculate conception, because sex was never discussed, like ever at all. Like, I don't even know how I was born, because that's how tight-lipped she kept on the subject of sex. But as a result of that, I too then took that data and I formulated beliefs that surrounded sex, my own sexuality, my own sensuality, what I thought of my body, what my body was for, who it should or could be given to. But then I had in my mind, you got to wait till you're married. That was foundationally, that was where I was. That was the box I sat in until I was 17. And no, when I was 16, I had a boyfriend. He was a senior. I was a sophomore. I was still a virgin. He wanted to have sex. I said, no, absolutely not. He was away at college. He was like, you know what, girl, I can't do you, boo. Like, I need to get the cakes, basically. And I'm like, no, like, I can't do that, because I'm inside that box, right? So I'm just like, it ain't happening. Like, and so he broke up with me. So I took that data and now I associated my staunch, rigid beliefs about sex and sexuality to, oh, if you want a relationship, you got to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the only way to keep a relationship like that. You have to give him what he wants, regardless of what you believe. So the next relationship, I'm 17, I'm a senior, and the subject comes up again. New boyfriend, new human experience, new data. Subject comes up. I reluctantly say yes, get pregnant. The first time. Who does that? Like, I think these things only happen to me. Who does that? And so I'm like, new data coming in. I'm 17. I'm now pregnant. I tell this guy who's supposed to be my boyfriend, and he tells me it's not his. Like, wait, what? I was like, are you serious right now? And so then now I have to make a life-changing decision to either keep or terminate this pregnancy. I made the best decision for what I could with the information that I had and what I thought was best for my life at that time. But because my mom had created an environment where you don't talk about sex, I had to make that decision on my own as a 17-year-old. I have to figure out, what do I do in this situation? And I made the decision that I made, which was to terminate the pregnancy. Do I look back on that all the time and think, if there was one thing that maybe I could say I probably jumped the gun on, I wish I had more data, that's the thing. But I wouldn't change it. I've forgiven, to your point, I've forgiven myself for that, because I did the best that I could in the moment. And holding on to that is not going to fix it. And so that's that healing part where you start digging all this stuff up and you're just like, what the heck did I go through? And how am I ever going to begin to become healthy? Like, what does that even look like you have to write all of that code for yourself, because it's your journey, it's your experience. Do you think like that there was anything like when you were coming up where you kind of had one of those moments where now when you look back on it later, you're like, oh, okay, I see why I did what I did, but if I had to do it all over again, I would either not do it, I would do it differently, or anything like that?
So I didn't experience that until I was a young adult. Because of the beliefs and things that I held around relationships and sex, I was actually quite terrified of both. And so I never entered into my first relationship until it was with, the man that I married and then later divorced. So, and the crazy thing is we're here at this point now, and you were here from the very beginning of when Cassie's life truly began outside of living through others like my mom or my friends. So at 17, I moved to Arizona, and at that time I had met, who later became my husband and the next husband. But that's one of those moments where I wish I had known more information around red flags. And it's crazy because you would think, if you've grown up with it, you would be able to identify them like that. You'd be able to know each and everything that it's like, oh, I know where that's going to lead. But that's not usually the talk that, people have with you. They have the talk where, okay, it's all happened and here's what it looks like for the aftermath. You never realize the escalation of it coming up to that point. And so for me, I remember there were very specific moments. So my ex-husband and I, we dated for 1 whole year. And then I finally was like, okay, I'll be your girlfriend. It took a whole year, and it's because what I grew up with, I didn't see that there was love in sex. I didn't see that there was love within a relationship. So I never really wanted one, or even to have sex, So we finally started dating, and then we finally started having sex. And there were moments even then that, he would do certain things and I didn't identify those as red flags. Although now when I look back at it, I'm like, that was a huge red flag. Mm-hmm. And my turning point that led me on this journey was I also ended up getting pregnant when I was 18. And we thought we were in love, and he was younger than me. So he was 17, I was 18. And we were like, yeah, obviously you're pregnant, so now we got to get married. Like it was almost like there was no other option. There was nothing else to think about. We're together, we're dating, and now I'm pregnant. Obviously we have to, go get married and just make this official. We're going to be one big happy family. So I wish that I was in a moment of time where I just had more information as well as more trust in the people that did love me. Because I think that at the time I was in a really conflicted place of my life where I had been screwed over by people I had trusted. And it was my first taste of, you can't trust everyone. And I put up blockers and I stopped trusting and thinking that other people are trying to do what's best for me. And I started thinking more of like, you're doing what's best for you, or you're saying what's best for you. Right. So when I went through that moment, for those that did know, and you were one of them that did know that this was the next step I was about to take in this very early new relationship of mine, I definitely had warnings like, don't do that. But we also didn't really tell anyone. So I never told my mom. I never told my sister, my brother, and those are my immediate family, the people that I'm close with. So if I knew what I knew now, I think it would just be like, I wish the little 18-year-old me knew that there were other options, knew and felt that it's okay to have a baby outside of wedlock. Not that it's desired, but it's okay. You don't have to create a life commitment off of something that happened that you were not expecting. So needless to say, we got married and I got to know him more. And the longer I got to know him, the more I found out, the more toxic everything became. And for my situation, I don't regard it as a mistake because, I did get my girls that I have now out of it. It made me much stronger. I had so much self-realization in that journey of being married and not being married. But I definitely jumped on it so fast. And after we got married, I think it was maybe a month later, I ended up having a miscarriage at 10 weeks pregnant. And that, was one of those moments that I never healed from. It took me, even after having my second child and being divorced and everything, I could still think about that moment of time and I would break down in tears because I blamed myself for my miscarriage. And when it happened, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't have real sympathy or like a support team around me to help me get through that. It was kind of like, okay, you miscarried. Well, my ex didn't know what to do. He was 17 and he's trying to be an adult. I'm 18. I'm trying to be an adult. And his family was so happy when they found out that, I did miscarry. And so I never got comfort or support from them. Now it was like, well, how do we make this marriage not work? Because, they were up with it and then down with it. And it was just very confusing for me. And so I didn't feel like I was allowed to grieve the loss that I just had because no one else was grieving it. And now I have to get up and keep going to work and, trying to be an adult now because I'm a wife too. And, now I got to put these pieces back together and really figure out what is this puzzle even going to look like now. So even years later, it took me so long to confront that and heal from it. And I had to seek outside help. I had to go to someone else and they helped me understand that it wasn't my fault. And they led me into that journey of forgiving myself for miscarrying, even though I knew it wasn't my fault. I felt that it was. And I felt that I had entered into this situation so quickly that just things had gotten so chaotic so fast and out of control that I just didn't really know what next steps to take. So I think for me, that was kind of my major turning point was the combination of being pregnant, getting excited about the pregnancy, getting married, and I saw my happy ending right in front of me. It was that picture perfect family. It was that nuclear family. I'd never experienced that. No one in my family got married. Like that's just not even something that they did. And so I felt so lucky and I was so optimistic and so happy. And then everything got taken away and just went south as soon as we got married. And then bam, here's the miscarriage. And then bam, now I got to deal with the family and the reality. And bam, now the marriage is turning abusive. And it was just a lot. So I really wish that I trusted the people that loved me and I listened to them more because I felt like I knew it all. I absolutely did.
Oh Lord.
Yeah, I did. You know how I was at 17. Nobody could tell me nothing. And my whole premise was, obviously, I know what's best for me. I'm 17. I moved out of state. I'm going to school. I got a job. Now I'm married. Like I'm doing good. I'm on top of my game. Nobody can tell me nothing because I've made it this far. I've made it through my past. That past, I'm not that anymore. But little do you know, like when you don't heal from that stuff, you recreate it in a different way. You recreate exactly what you came from when it's not healed. You just do it in a different way. So now, your reality is skewed because you think you're happy, but really you just have a whole new picture with the same paint. And it's like, when are you going to get new paint? You got to heal that, So that for me was my moment in my whole life where I just wish that I trusted more. I wish I wasn't so stubborn and so in my ways, that I was willing to trust those that had already been through it, that had that experience, that knowledge, and that I was more open to hearing it and trusting the information.
Right.
But, you know, you can't change it. And I'm blessed to be where I'm at today. So I don't regret nothing, but that trust factor would have definitely, I think, reshaped what happened in my life.
Well, and I think for you, because you're right, like we had conversations back then, and yeah, you have always been, let me plant my feet and I'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And while sometimes that doesn't serve you, because like we think at 17 or 18 we know everything, like you can't tell me nothing, like I'm grown, especially once that you hit that 18, whoo buddy, you really think you know everything then, right? But to your point, like then you're not wanting to trust the people. Like I tell my kids all the time, like learn my lesson, don't take the class. Like I done messed up more stuff and forgot more stuff than you even can have possibly begun to learn right now. But at 18 you're just like, I've lived my life. Like I'm grown now.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, your life expectancy is into your 70s. So how at 18 why do we feel like we've lived our whole life and we know so much when there's so much life yet to live and so many more human experiences to have? And so the thing that kind of stunted you in that instance is the same quality and the same characters that have now brought you through it.
Mm-hmm.
Because to your point, like you didn't want to let other people in, you didn't want to let people know what was going on, like you didn't share stuff for you until your back was up against the wall and you're like, okay. But life had to show you, like, and same with me, like life had to show me you don't know what you think you know with your little not so grown self, you know. And so, but it's that same drive, it's that same tenacity, it's that same ambition, all of those things that can stunt you and stop you can also propel you forward. Because I mean, you look back now at that period in your life and you're like, I'm a homeowner, I'm a single mom, I'm rocking out a bomb job. You got your life together, but do you still have more stuff to learn? Absolutely. We all are continuing to be a work in progress. So, you know, that healing from the source part also involves, you know, what we talk about with the generational system is being able to go back and figure out which ones of those systems that you were exposed to, which ones affected you and how did they affect you? And how does that show up now in your life and in your future? Because you can't prevent something from happening until you understand why and how it affected you in the first place. And, you know, when we look at, you know, the different types of systems, and we're talking about elitism and, you know, racism, poverty, abuse, mental illness, like there's all kinds of different systems. And sometimes for some people, those things are layered on top of each other. Mm-hmm. And so all of that data, here we are trying to compile it and put it into something that we know how to live our life with. And it's just, it can be really, really, truly a hard thing. So I know that we talked about this kind of before we started this interview, or not discussion for better this conversation. This is the first time you're sharing some of that stuff publicly. And you know, we talk like, well, we can record it or we can, you know, whatever. And to your credit, you're like, you know what? No, I think I'm ready. And, you know, we talked about on one of the pre-recorded videos that we did, when we talked about, you know, being able to get kind of through that process and look back on it, but being able to tell that story. And not only to be able to share our stories, but to be able to say, okay, I own this was probably not necessarily the right thing for me to have done, but I did it. Now where do I go with it?
Mm-hmm.
Because we can't change the past. We can't change, but we can choose to make different decisions in our present so that what the system that affected us doesn't affect the next generation. And so, with 9 seconds, that's really what this is all about, is preventing it not only from ever happening, but to make sure that people who are affected by domestic violence, affected by all the things in their generational system, have the tools to start kind of picking that stuff apart.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not putting out flames. We're going for the fire. I don't want to just have to be dousing flames all the time. I need to figure out, like, how do we stop him from sparking up to begin with? And that's what this is all about. And that's why this conversation is so amazing. And I'm so thankful to you for your transparency and your, willing to be authentic about, like, this was my experience. And but being able to show, and this is the part I want to be able to highlight from this conversation, that healing involves looking back at those things, not with regret or shame or dishonor or anything like that, but as data, and understand that our experiences in our past is data. It's information that now that we have it and we have more tools on how to process it, we can now choose to do things differently. And all of the things that we viewed as negative in our past, if you take the time and you make that investment in your healing process and really truly trying to heal the source, then your future looks way different than your past. Where you are now is testimony to that. Like, where you are now versus where you started. And your oldest daughter is what, 4?
Mm-hmm.
So in 4 years, all the stuff you've been through, all the things, and all of the work that you did to go back and dig up some of those roots, and not just focusing on the here and now, but you're like, no, I got to fix it for my girls. I got to fix it for me, but I got to fix it for them. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And that's definitely the motivation. Is I don't want this to be a generational thing. I can see how it played out generationally, and it's like it stops today because I don't want to put my girls through that. So the best way to stop it is to heal yourself, to find out where did you get it and how do you stop it, and then heal it. And that's the best way. The only thing that you can give your kids that's better than anything else in the world is a you that is healed and present and happy.
Yeah.
That's all kids want. They want a parent that is healed, happy, and present. Forget all the gifts. If you can show up in a healed, happy, and present way for your kids, they will be healed, happy, and successful and present in their future. So that's my belief, at least.
No, and like I always tease you about being the organic mom, because you're that mom that, lets the kids go paint on the sidewalk, and it's like, oh, here, TT, go take her to the science center and let her play in mud. And I'm like, oh my God, like, who does this? And I'm like trying for her to not get dirty. And literally she said to me, she was like, my mom doesn't care.
Yeah. Have fun.
And so the fact that the generational system that you came up in, one of the things you shared was that I didn't get the loves and the hugs and the affirmations about who I am and my place in this world. And when I watch you with your daughters now, you would never be able to tell that, because you shower them with all of the things that says you're loved, you're valued, and you teach them how to experience the world. And I think sometimes we leave it up to kids to sort of just figure it out. And then that's when we're back 25 years later on a healing journey, trying to figure out where we got to drop the ball back in the past. And so, there's no predicting what the future looks like for the girls, but I can definitely say, just from watching how you interact with them and then engaging with them myself, like, they're different kids than I ever was, or that my girls were. Like, I look at some of the things that you do with them and wish I had done more of that. I sometimes wish, like, oh, if I would have been less focused on my career and climbing the corporate ladder, like you said, that present, being present. I was present, but not as much as I could have been. You know, I was present, but sometimes I wasn't as engaged as I should have been. And so, you know, you look at those things, but recognizing that with the information I had, I did the best I could. And so, again, I just want to thank you for agreeing to kind of open up. I know this was so outside your comfort zone, especially to agree to do it live. It's definitely not your world. It's not your wheelhouse, but you know, that's again testimony to your commitment to 9 seconds and the work that we're doing for domestic violence prevention. So I thank you for that. And with that, I'm going to wrap this up because we're almost at an hour. So as always, guys, if you hear something, share something. That's the one ask that I have about any of the videos that I share or any of the content that I offer. If you hear something, share the video out, share the post out. You just never know what somebody's going through, what word can be the thing that helps them have the courage that they need to move through and be able to start tackling their own healing journey. And certainly it looks different for everybody, but you just never know. Like everybody's going through something, that much you can be assured of. So that's it for this episode of our series for 31 Days of Prevention. And as I always say, in the meantime and in between time, guys, stay well, stay healthy, and stay blessed. And we will see you back here tomorrow with another message for our 31 Days of Prevention series. So thanks again, Cass, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. Bye.